Today on Mr. Media, I'll talk to Joel Gilbert, director and producer of a new documentary film, Bob Dylan Revealed. Stick around. If you gotta serve somebody, it might as well be me, folks. So much media, so little time. Who keeps track of it all? That would be me. This is Bob Andelman, and this is the Mr. Media interview. You know, MrMedia.com, MRmedia.com. Stop by and check it out. There are more than 900 archived celebrity and pop culture interviews for your listening pleasure. The show is brought to you today by Audible. Audible is offering Mr. Media listeners a free audiobook download and a 14-day trial offer to give you a chance to check out their very cool service. I love listening to books on tape. If you've never tried it before, actors or sometimes the authors themselves read to you. It's great for the commute, the beach, or even unwinding before bed. You can choose a free audiobook from Audible's enormous library of titles, including today's top Bob Dylan-related bestsellers, such as Bob Dylan in America by Sean Wilentz, Chronicles Volume 1, narrated by Sean Penn, or even David Haydew's Positively 4th Street. Here's an excerpt from Chronicles Volume 1, narrated by Sean Penn.
At last I was here, in New York City, a city like a web too intricate to understand, and I wasn't going to try. I was there to find singers, the ones I'd heard on record. Dave Van Ronk, Peggy Seeger, Ed McCurdy, Brownie McGee, and Sonny Terry, Josh White, the New Lost City Ramblers, Reverend Gary Davis, and a bunch of others. Most of all, to find Woody Guthrie. New York City, the city that would come to shape my destiny. Modern Gomorrah. I was at the initiation point of square one, but in no sense a neophyte.
You can even download Will Eisner, A Spirited Life, the biography of the comic book and graphic novel legend, which I wrote and will read to you personally. To download your free audiobook today, go to audibletrial.com/radio. Again, that's audibletrial.com/radio for your free audiobook. Mr. Media is recorded live before a studio audience who won't figure out that my audio failed to record during the following conversation in the new media capital of the world, St. Petersburg, Florida. I can't imagine the challenge of trying to capture the career of Bob Dylan in a documentary film. For starters, which Dylan? Folk Dylan? Dylan Gone Electric? Or Dylan the social activist, the poet, the singer, or even the mumbler? In his documentary film, Bob Dylan Revealed, director Joel Gilbert spends more than an hour collecting stories and concert film about all those Dylans. It's a slice that adds texture to our knowledge of the legendary performer. Then, about an hour and 10 minutes in, Gilbert turns his film upside down to reveal a new focus, Dylan's short-lived, controversial, born-again Christian phase. It's thick with Christianity, spreading the word of the Lord, Jews for Jesus, and the Vineyard Christian Fellowship Church. Now, what I don't get from the film, with which Dylan clearly did not cooperate, is why Dylan set aside a lifetime of Judaism for born-again Christianity. To his credit, Gilbert's film doesn't avoid the fact that the public, and many Christians, didn't get this Bob Dylan. The same thing happened when Dylan subsequently jumped teams again, giving up Christianity for extreme Orthodox Judaism and Chabad. Why? We may never know. And that's not necessarily a fault of Gilbert's work, it's just the mystery of Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan Revealed was released on DVD and VOD in May. You can check out the trailer on bobdylanrevealed.com. Joel Gilbert, welcome to Mr. Media.
Hi, Mr. Media. Thanks for having me. Dylan was there at the seminal period of the Civil Rights Movement, and he wrote all those great acoustic songs that became the anthems of the Civil Rights Movement, Blowing in the Wind, Times Are A-Changin'. And that's what endeared him to so many fans. He was the acoustic god, the voice of the generation, the voice of the protest movement. So when he decided to go electric and play rock and roll music, that was very fascinating to see how his fans felt betrayed, very personally betrayed, that he was no longer carrying the torch, so to speak. And as you go and watch through the film, you get an idea. It literally reveals what that was about for Bob Dylan. He was and is a poet and a writer who describes things happening around him. So what was happening at the times was the Civil Rights Movement, and he wrote beautiful songs about it. but that didn't necessarily mean that he was going to be like Joan Baez and spend his life working on that particular issue. He went on, when rock and roll music happened, he wrote rock and roll music. Later in the film, when the Christian revival movement was sweeping Los Angeles in the late 70s, all the entertainers were into Bible study classes and Jesus people. He became immersed in that and wrote about that. So when you watch the film, you will discover who Bob Dylan is from his point of view and why he wrote certain songs at certain times. And you'll see that obviously the film is a labor of love, and Dylan's different incarnations throughout his 5-decade career are all very fascinating and worthy of a film themselves. Well, I was and am a big Bob Dylan fan, and I initially started a Bob Dylan tribute show in the late 90s, a lookalike sound-alike recreation band called Highway 61 Revisited. And I met through that effort. We were performing at a charity event, and Mickey Jones, Bob Dylan's original drummer from 1966 Electric Tour with the band, happened to be at that charity event as an MC. So I said to the organizers, I said, hey, when this guy shows up, send him up to the stage. So sure enough, he came up. I dismissed my drummer pretty quickly. And Mickey played several songs with us, Like a Rolling Stone, Ballad of a Thin Man, Leopard Skin Pillbox Hat. And I literally felt like I was there in 66. His drumming style was so unique and powerful. So he invited me to his house and said, hey, I got to show you some home movies that I made of the Bob Dylan 1966 tour, if you can help me find them. So we dug through his garage and found them, and that's kind of how it all began. Yeah, I do a recreation, so that's kind of my professional hobby. And then I became a filmmaker more as a real profession. Actually, over the years, as I interviewed Dylan band members over time, after I interviewed them, I'd say, hey, how'd you like to come play with my band? And they would all say, yeah, man. So in my band today are actually 4 full-time Dylan band members. John Jackson, the guitarist from the 90s, Winston Watson, the drummer, you remember those guys from MTV Unplugged, Scarlett Rivera, the violinist from the 70s, the Hurricane, Rolling Thunder is in the band. We've had Rob Stoner, the bass player in the band. So my joke to the audience, I say, if this keeps up, I'm going to be replaced by Bob, and I won't be in the band anymore within the circle. So I've learned quite a lot about Dylan intimately that is reflected in the film. Well, we're talking about a 50-year time period career, and there were seminal people in each period. For instance, producer Jerry Wexler, you hang on every word of how he came to find that Bob Dylan wanted to record religious music. He thought he was being hired by Dylan to make a new Dylan album, and when he showed up, he said, it's wall-to-wall Jesus, and he didn't know if he could do it. So there are people like him. Ramblin' Jack Elliott doesn't do many interviews. I have an extensive interview with him. I dug up Reuben Hurricane Carter in Toronto, Canada, behind 6 layers of security, and he never did an interview ever since that time when he got out of prison. So each interview is very fascinating in its own right. Pastor Bill Dwyer, Bob Dylan's Bible class teacher, talked about the conversion to Christianity, all the inside information, how it came about. It was a very sincere effort. And I'd say that, Mickey Jones, Scarlett Rivera, every single interviewee had something substantial they would not have been in the film. Well, they were playing for an audience of inmates that were mostly African American who were into blues and rhythm. And she had that Canadian kind of whitewash, folky kind of music that had no rhythm to it, so they couldn't get into it. So she did get booed when Dylan showed up to the Clinton State Prison to perform with the Rolling Thunder Revue for Hurricane Carter. And so she did, say some ugly things to the Hurricane, but she's known to be a piece of work pretty much by everyone. So it wasn't too surprising. Yeah, we left in pretty much everything that was anybody said that was of any significance, and we'll leave that to people to watch the film to check it out, which is, by the way, it's also not only on DVD, but it came out on VOD, video on demand, 100 million homes. So if you have cable TV, direct TV, Dish Network, US and Canada, you could find it under documentaries.